If you have
No.
a production line of children that you were so desperate for, then then they all wear a wig. That's actually a really obvious point now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So
And welcome back to the next episode of Behind the Curtain. In this episode, we're going to be looking at predominantly character work because it is the film M3gan, which has been released in the UK this week. And it is a fantastic sort of example of a situation where you could approach it in so many different ways. And what I think Chris and I are going to do is we're going to talk about how we would actually try and solve a problem like this before we really look at the trailer and then to try and determine what they've actually done, if that makes sense. So, Chris, I don't know if there's a starting shot or anything where we can just encapsulate what we're going to be talking about, like this doll, which is this creepy sort of horror doll, I think it is. I think that's the way you summarize it, really. So anything that we want to look at and then sort of make some calls on things that would be concerning, things that would be potentially problematic, or ways, in reflection of different budgets, things like that. What are the different approaches?
yeah, I think like seems to be the theme here. There's a bunch of shots that I'm looking at going like, I'm not exactly sure how they've done that, which is always, a good sign of solid visual effects. And in this case, yeah, like I say, there's a bunch of shots where I'm not sure, which made me think the interesting take on this would be just thinking about, how I'd play it if, I had the script for this and they were asking me to bid it out. And my approach is always to go, okay, whatever we can do in camera, let's do that in camera. I guess that's, there's nothing special about that approach. I mean, actually, anyone who isn't from a visual effects background as a traditional filmmaker wants to do stuff in camera.
Yeah.
But what people don't realize is visual effects artists want to do it in camera as well, because
Yeah.
why else would we waste our lives in front of a computer doing something that would have looked better in camera? So we actually all have that impulse to be like, what can we do in camera? And the tricky thing to navigate is then going, yeah, but how do expectations meet up against reality? And what you'll have with filmmakers who are less experienced in visual effects is, they will want to do absolutely everything in camera
yeah,
when it's just not plausible. However, with this film, I feel like my instinct would be to go, well, firstly, you're not going to be working on a huge budget. I mean, M3gan's on a $15 million budget, which is respectable, especially for a horror film, which generally the cheaper end of the scale as far as budgets go. But the doll is in a whole bunch of shots. She's the hero of the film. And so as soon as you start looking for a visual effects solution for the doll,
the hero or the villain, Chris, the hero or the villain, do we know?
Oh, yeah, that's true. I don't know, as is always the case. I haven't watched the thing. I just watch the trailer and then go back to my dungeon and do the visual effects stuff on the films that we're doing at the moment. I guess there's some ambiguity there,
When Chris says dungeon, he means Barcelona studio, by the way, for those anyone feeling sorry for him.
There's still dungeons in Barcelona. But what was I talking about? Yeah, the hero slash villain.
Yeah, hero slash villain, definitely.
The doll that murders people. I assume murdering is in some way bad. But this is not. We're not going to go into this discussion of morality here just now.
But the fact that it's a horror is really important because it's going to have huge sort of artistic like cues on decisions on how do things need to look. Like, for example, she's got to be unsettling if this is a horror. Yeah. Right. Or she's got to have the ability to be unsettling. Like, but her design by default, when I look at her design, I see childlike proportions, large head. These are all things that echo cuteness, large eyes. Like, so do you want to talk a little bit maybe around that? Like, because would you agree that that's sort of like, that's normally a comforting set of proportions? Like,
okay, there's two different things there. Firstly, the fact that it is horror is a really important thing to consider, because for me, I think comedy and horror are the least appropriate uses of visual effects. I think, generally speaking, for whatever reason, for a thing to be genuinely scary or genuinely funny, we have
Yeah.
to know that it was in camera. We have to feel that way. So, compared to like science fiction or whatever, you can do visual effects all day long and it'll be very forgiving. But no one wants to see Gremlins done in visual effects, the the tangibility of the thing, I think, is really important. So
And with comedy, you go even further. If you look at like Red Dwarf or things like that, where it's done in camera, but it's done like almost comically badly, but it's still so real, but in a comic
yes,
way, if you get what I mean. That I laugh really hard at Red Dwarf. Like there's a film, Something About Mary, where there's a dog attacking one of the actors, and Ben Stiller, to get away from the dog, just grabs the dog and throws it out the window. It's like a little angry terrier, and during the frames where it's thrown out the window, it's clearly just a really bad like stuffed version of a terrier that they just launch out the window. But it's so funny because this thing just so bad just gets like launched off, and it works really well. But we want to avoid that here, I imagine. Like
I guess the thing is that it's due to imperfection, right? It's due to chaos. And those things, the end result of chaos is often scary and it's often funny. So, so I do find myself like, we've done a few horror films. Well, Half Bad that we spoke about before, that's horror. And, and they did a ton of work in camera there, which is what made the visual effects work sing. But whenever I'm bidding out a horror thing, my instinct is always, let's do it in camera, even if that means less work for us. Like, I don't want to work on a shot where everyone just goes, "Ugh, that was so synthetic and digital," So for this, I would be going like, okay, what can we do? What can we do in camera? And especially because the face isn't moving much, my instinct would be to go, okay, can we get some kind of mask on an actress that we then augment digitally?
So you're like ruling out an animatronic immediately there. That's interesting because we're dealing with a character that's robotic. Like, so I don't know. I'm just throwing that out as a question early on. It's sort of like in camera doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an actress. It could be a puppet. It could be an actual animatronic. But you're locking straight down on actress. Like
the animatronic stuff, I'm not so sure about that. Or at least in this case, there is actually in a lot of the shots a kind of nuanced enough movement where there's like just a tiny little smirk the first time we see her. Where's that shot where she's ripping off the glasses, and then there's a tiny little blunk, just that tiny little smirk. That the subtlety of movement is much easier to do digitally, right? Animatronics are great for like real broad strokes, right? Just really strong movement. So creature stuff and whatever, where you don't need nuance in the movement so much.
Or like a dragon opening its mouth and roaring or something, or is a big thing. Is it?
Yeah, potentially something like that. I mean, what happens a lot, both in terms of prosthetics and animatronics, that maybe happens more than people realize, is that you take that in-camera prosthetic as a base, or you take that in-camera animatronic as a base, and then you level that up with visual effects.
You enhance it,
yeah. There's a lot of like cheap little tweaks that you can do in visual effects. I mean, let's go back to that smile. You'd think I'd know where it is by now, but here we go. So let's say that this is a girl wearing foam latex mask, something like that. I don't know if that's the case, but for reasons we'll get into, I think that would be my instinct to go that route if I was doing this show. But then there's no way you're going to get that tiny little smile, right? Boom. There. But a movement like that, very easy to do digitally because you can do it in 2D. When we're talking about visual effects, there is a clear divide in compositing land, which is where you're predominantly two-dimensional, and that means you're essentially working on top of the footage that is already there, and 3D land, where you're going through a package like Maya or Blender or whatever, which introduces the complexity massively, because 3D land, you're effectively recreating the real world and then rendering that and then compositing that back in, right? Now, these little tweaks and touches like this can be done in compositing, right? It's the same as you might do if you're familiar with Photoshop and you wanted to make someone look a little bit more smiley. Maybe you'd use a tool like Warp or Liquify or whatever to push the corners of the mouth up. Equivalent tools exist in compositing packages. So let's say that this is the actress wearing a mask. To get that smile, you then literally just move it up, and that's a trick that you can learn to do very, very quickly, and happens all the time, all the time, all the time in visual effects, but it's limited, right?
Yeah.
Because it's limited with what you have there. So you couldn't open her mouth using that trick, for example, because the information that is filmed here doesn't have the information of an open mouth. So if you'd film this, again, let's say this is an actress wearing a mask and she didn't open her mouth and you wanted to do that, well, now you're in 3D land. Now
Yeah.
you need this whole setup, her whole face and her mouth interior to be 3D, and then you need to animate that mouth opening in 3D. You need to match the lighting to shot, render it out, and then composite it over the
So
top.
you'd have to know what lighting took place on stage, like on set at the time, record that, recreate it accurately enough so that your digital work match the camera, match the position, lots and lots of these extra stages. Yeah. Like
So as soon as you go 3D, right? As soon as you have that element of needing to recreate the set digitally, then you're opening up a whole bunch of work per shot, because you need to match the lighting, you need to match the camera work, you need to match the animation of what the actress is doing, and then you still have the compositing stage after that. So a shot like this, for example, well, I think that the movement of the mouth there is being added in digitally. Let's say, for argument's sake, that it's not, right? Well, the advantage here of just having a girl wearing a mask is that once you've got that in camera, you've got your shot.
Yeah.
Right. So then your visual effects budget isn't going up by anything at all for that shot. And if she is in 100 shots, then you want as many of those shots as possible where you can just go, filmed it, it's in the bag and done.
Yeah. And the issues with having like a face replacement or something with a prosthetic is that you can't make the face smaller than the actress. But this face in this character is really quite big. It's quite round, beautiful, bulging out, sort of childlike. It's probably easy to find a child actor with a small enough face and head to build a prosthetic out and have the result that you've got here. Yeah, would you agree? So like this is what I'm saying. There is the option here. Now I'm not saying this for the whole face. There's areas of the face like the eyes which are impossibly large and very, very sort of refined in their movement that I don't think you could get through a mask. Yeah. So you could have refined movement through a good prosthetic. You can't have such good refined movement through something like a foam latex mask or something. The subtle movements of the face won't translate through that so well. But also, if the eyes are impossibly large, then we probably have to have replaced them with a digital process that probably involves a full 3D build for that area of the face. Like, would you agree?
Yes. I want to step in just with a quick caveat here, because after me and Rich recorded this, I did find a making of M3gan, and I'm going to post the link to that in the description below, because I think it's well worth checking out, and it shows the extent to which the robot/doll was done as an in-camera effect. But I do want to point out, having been involved in a ton of making ofs myself, is there is always a push to try and make it seem like you did more in camera than you did, because in a way that's kind of sexier, in a way that's more impressive. I think as filmmakers, we often look at visual effects as kind of like a get out, and doing it in camera is the real daddy of effects work. So see what you think. My take on it is that the in-camera work was amazing and probably saved them a ton of money for the reasons that me and Rich speak about. But I think there was probably more post work, more visual effects work done than is apparent in that making of. But I will leave that up to you. See what you think. I think the way that I would look to play this, if we were going down the mask route, and if they haven't, then the reasons for not doing it would be really interesting to know. But yeah, the eyes are going to have to be digital if the mask route is what you're doing. So potentially it's something worn like there or something like that. So you do a digital takeover from that point upwards, and then you have the mask from that point downwards. The advantage of having a mask as well, I suppose, is that you could have multiple child actresses doing the same role, because when you're working with kids, you're really limited to the amount of time they're allowed to work in a day, which is 4 hours, right? So if you could have a queue of kids.
A production
To
line. A
yeah.
small production line of children. That's what we need. Like,
Well,
that'll
okay,
solve everything for this. But like,
okay. You said it, not me, Rich, that we need a small production line of children. But
it's a very real complexity. Like, you know, when you've got say like a huge set with a really big scene that requires loads of actors to be there, and some of the actors can only be there for 4 hours and other actors can be there for longer periods, then, you know, can you get all of that set up, all the work you need done, and within that 4 hour window? So if you have a kid that has a twin, for example,
yeah,
then you can keep rolling the camera with all of that setup. So it is actually a very real production problem. Like, and having a mask where, as long as you had a very thin framed, like, actress, and it might not even be a child. Like, if you can have an adult who's very slight build and can pass, then you can film for longer on set with them. So there are actually quite a few adults who are just incredibly tiny in their build,
yeah.
and that has advantages. So there's all these nuances to the film industry. So yeah, sorry. Go on.
Can I take a tangent from
Please
that?
do, please. I was going in the wrong direction. Like,
There's a few things that are killing me here. So one, what we're looking at here, I'm going to put money on saying that this is all puppet, right? Because you see, like,
it feels silicon.
yes,
Good
yeah,
point. Good point.
and like the unevenness of that, right? That feels to me like when you're working with silicon in real life and you're cutting it out or whatever, as opposed to it going through a production pipeline in a factory or something like that, which a real robot would. So
yeah.
this portion of the eye, all of the outer portion, feels handmade,
Yeah.
which tells me they made a puppet. They made a puppet head at the very least for this shot.
Which, if you think about it, is, you know, this is meant to be a synthetic thing. So that would be a very clever decision to actually make it, because that's the production process that it would have gone through in the film. Like, you know, in the real life of the film. Like,
Yeah.
the eyebrow also feels hair punched, like
Yes.
the bit that's in focus. So that's a really good pickup, because to me, the iris at the pupil, sure as hell, isn't physical.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that sort of subtlety of movement is a CG. So again, they've and you know, Chris, in a discussion we had earlier, pointed out you can be limited on the speed of animatronic movement, like it's in the actual servo speed. We've got a very fast blink there, but you can play with frame rates, so you can speed footage up, slow it down. So sometimes when you want movement to be unsettling, you can actually play with the speed that you play the frames back, and it creates a slightly disconcerting feel to the movement. And I think you've hit on something there, Chris, that's probably a physical model with games with the frame rate, and then a CG enhancement, which is just great to see all these different things. God, now I'm looking at all the other shots, saying, is it a puppet here? Is it a puppet there?
Because we know for sure a puppet existed. So
yeah,
if it did, then you're going to want to milk that for everything that it's worth.
Yeah.
There's another interesting thing, not directly related to that, but the movement of the hair has a doll-like movement to it.
Yeah.
And well, I just don't know about makeup enough to know whether or not you must be able to treat a real person's hair to act that way. Because otherwise,
you have a huge range of hair that those professionals pull on, like they source for different circumstances. Like, so, like, you get like fine hair from the belly of a goat, for example, can be used for like very, very soft things, and you can have human hair.
What you're missing then surely is that if you can't treat human hair to be that way, then you can't have, well, then you would need to hide the actress's hair and have all of that hair as
no. What I'm saying is, I think it's real hair, but doll hair doesn't necessarily feel like human hair. So they might have used like yak hair or horse hair or something. It's still real hair being filmed, but it's got that slightly more doll-like quality rather than like natural human quality. So it's still a physical, 100%.
So 100% that hair is in camera and real. But the thing that I'm trying to get you to listen to
Sorry.
is
Go on. Am I missing the point? Go on.
if that is moving like a doll's hair, do you have the actual actress's hair? Probably you don't, right? Yeah, you definitely don't. If you have a production line of children that you would so desperate for, then they all wear a wig. That's actually a really obvious point now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So,
because you'll instantly have consistency across the different performers that the look would be.
So I think we're getting somewhere, but this shot specifically is throwing me in as much as I'm going like, okay, look, clothing, you don't want to do that digitally. There's no need to do it digitally. You can just put an actress in there.
Yeah.
Hair, you don't want to do digitally. It can be a bit of a pain in the ass. But also if you did it digitally, the problem would be, as the problem always is where digital meets reality. And so if this was digital hair, you'd have problems where it meets the clothing because it has to interact with it, cast shadows, whatever, right?
All looks very convincing here.
Yes, no. Hair is very convincing. Hands, by design, don't feel like real human hands, but you could potentially have a thin glove that gives you the hand design or something, right? Which I think is what you do here. Maybe there's a mix of solutions because, of course, it wouldn't be difficult to, unless she's moving her hands in this shot, which I don't think she is, it wouldn't be difficult to just have puppet hands on the table. But I don't think you need to. If you can get a kind of glove on an actress, then it's fine for everything. And then we're saying, okay, well, maybe the actress is wearing something here and then the eyes are then replaced. The reason why I'm going, is because the color of the face is off in this shot. Like, this is significantly more red than that. And that isn't a consistent thing, right? If we have a look at another shot, well, maybe...
So you're saying that if that had been a real prosthetic mask, we wouldn't see a color inconsistency?
Yeah, the color would be consistent in every shot. Well, no, I mean, I guess the mask, because you would need to remake the mask a whole bunch of times, right? The girls...
Yeah, there could be pigment, but they normally have... like actual production paletted colors, so they literally go, right, we're going to literally make this paint and you're going to work from this palette. So it would normally, they would be very good, but there'll be people there to ensure consistency. So
Rich, I mean, what's the application time of a foam latex mask? Because that's eating into the time that you have the child actors for, and would be a reason for doing full digital
a full head. Like if you had to blend really well around the eyes and stuff like that, you're talking hours. Like for a child to be made up with a full face prosthetic that had multiple parts. So say you were saying something that had to connect around here and around the jaw and things like that. If it's just a latex mask that you pull over, it's faster. Like obviously a lot quicker. But yeah, it just depends which way we think they've gone here. But it's a very important consideration what you're saying there, is that will eat into the time.
Yeah, that could be a reason for going.
And it doesn't matter if you have a production line of small children at that point, because you have to apply it to each one, and there's no shortcut there. So
So yeah, I mean, it could well be full digital. I mean, it looks it to me. I don't say that as a criticism, because obviously what makes the whole design so effective is that you can lean into the uncanny valley and you can have it not feeling real, because if it felt real, then, well, it wouldn't be anywhere near as scary. But this shot specifically, for example, since it's the one we're on, still hair, that's all real. Clothing is all real. I don't see any reason for the neck not to be real. Incidentally, look, these colors match more closely. Yeah, the face is a little bit more red here, but not like it was in the previous shot, which is what makes me think that all of this would be digital. But then the problem that you have then, if you're going fully digital, is that any time that the hair comes over the face, so let's imagine that you get some strands of hair over the face here, which you don't really, because of this doll-like movement of the hair. It seems to move in like in big clumps, and you don't get these little strays that come in front of the face. But if you did, right, so let's say you have in-camera hair going over the front of the face, well, now you've got a problem, because as soon as you add your digital face over the top, it's going to go on top of that hair. So then you need to find a way to separate that hair. And if you had to do that, and you knew that you were going to have to do that in like 20, 30, 40, 50 shots, then I would go with one of two approaches. Either have the actress wearing something very green or very blue, there's something that you can essentially chroma key off to then separate that out. But the thing with chroma keying, green screens and blue screens, is that it works best when you have very, very flat surfaces, and a face is never going to be that. So it might be difficult to key off, in which case you might just stick your digital head over the top anyway. And then if you needed that extra bit of hair, then you could add in some digital hair.
A tiny bit of digital hair back over the top.
So you're still fully digital in that area. But it would still sorry, Rich.
Go.
If this was gliding forwards and backwards, if there was wind, pushing that hair forwards and backwards, then that connection is still a pain in the ass to manage.
Yeah. But I think the connection is really, really good. The way the hair sits there is convincing. And I don't think the hair would sit there around any other shape other than the shape that we see the doll's head. So what that means is if the actress's head isn't that shape, which I don't think it would be, I think she is wearing something that pushes the hair out to that shape. And then it's just the real reaction of the hair. And like you're saying, we're separating it with something like a color. Like, do you get what I mean by that? Like if her head was smaller, the hair would swing in over where the CG replacement is, and it would just be very difficult to make that look convincing. So in real life, her head is actually that shape to keep the hair in that position and get that interaction. So I think the actress is wearing something that expands the face out to that shape, like is what I'm trying to get to in a very long-winded way.
But do we think that every time when you're seeing it, so even with a simple movement like this, right, you might go, and the body's not moving even. So if you had a puppet, right, like even just a rod puppet, right, a rod puppet being something where there's just rods stuck into it, right? So here, if you had a puppet, then you wouldn't need an actress for this specific shot at all. If you had the head itself, you could just use the puppet to rotate the head upwards and then digitally augment the eyes.
Which means it could be the physical prosthetic. So sorry, not prosthetic, or a physical puppet / animatronic / thing, that's actually on set and filmed.
Yes, yeah. You see that subtle movement of the eyes that we're getting there?
So there has to be CG there, yeah.
That movement itself can be CG.
The slight pushing up of that slight tension that comes into her eyes, that there's an expression of anger just through that very, very slight change. So that could be what you were talking about right at the beginning about that 2D manipulation, that very subtle 2D manipulation of the frame.
Yeah.
Or it could be a 3D shape, like blended in.
This next one, it would look very cheap if you did this in 2D, right? So again, where I'm leaning towards is going, maybe it's just the whole thing is digital the whole time, right?
I think that's what they've done, but I love discussing the variations. That would be my call. The shape of the face, but the hair is real.
And so this movement that we're seeing through there, as robotic as it is, that's going to look very fake if you try and do it in 2D and in compositing. The reason being, as the lips and the mouth move, it's going to sound obvious to say it, they're moving into a different place, but that different place will have different lighting. So when you're just bending and warping stuff around in 2D, you can get really convincing effects, but it has to be subtle, because as it becomes more extreme, you start to notice that the lighting isn't changing. And in this shot, we can see as she moves her lips, then there's very subtle changes to the lighting and shadowing, which is exactly
what you'd expect. But would instantly see if they were absent, which is a really important detail.
So what? Pretty much always digital for most of the shots, even though we've seen they definitely had a puppet. So a puppet for some shots.
Yeah, maybe
just that shot.
Maybe the one where she's piled up against the tree there, like with the other cuddly toys, that could be a puppet with an eye enhancement again. Right.
Yeah, because the thing is, what you'd love is just to go, do you know what? That shot's there. It's in the bag. Let's move on, right? And you can't do that as soon as you have to do something digital. Here, even if she is a puppet, then the movement is digital. But no, I think, look, you see the color of the skin here is slightly yellower than in the rest of the face. Now the color of the face does of any human's face does change throughout, and it has bands of red. It's going to be redder through there. It's going to be bluer through the bottom here, and it is going to be yellower at the top. But that is slightly different to that, which just makes me think, yeah, that we've said this hair is in camera. I think what we call the matte line, where digital meets reality, is here, where this drifts from yellow to a slightly pinky color. I think so.
Interesting side story on that as well. The color of an actor's skin will change with temperature too. So if you have a prosthetic or something over an actor and then they change temperature, then what looks like an amazing paint job where everything's blended in perfectly can then suddenly not look convincing anymore. And my fiance actually, who does work on set as a special makeup sort of prosthetics artist, she noticed in a trailer that was quite warm, somebody was painting and felt like the color was not actually particularly matching, and a number of people were like a bit concerned that, okay, that does, the color could be matching that a little bit better. And as soon as the actor walked out onto a very, very cold set, their skin color changed very slightly with the blood flow and matched. So the person was deliberately painting the wrong side, knowing that when you left the warm trailer onto a cold set, the color of the skin was going to change a little bit, which is just crazy good.
Yeah.
If you think about that. So anticipating all those things.
I mean, there's an interesting thing with discussions where you have puppets and animatronics and makeup and visual effects that is worth kind of digging down into a little bit, because oftentimes they're kind of played one against the other, even within the industry, because you're effectively bidding on the same work. There's very few places that do practical work and visual effects. I think there should be more, but the way that it is, there aren't. So there is always that tension. But as we touch on a bunch, the best results come from a combination, and even shows where it's kind of like where you see a lot of prosthetic work being done, and it's being done to a very high standard. Oftentimes there are going to be areas where the prosthetic work finishes. You'll often notice it around the mouth, or wherever it's finishing in general, where either through the application or just through the wear and tear of the day, you can see where that prosthetic effect is ending, and the real actor's skin is showing underneath, and you get kind of this visible seam. Very, very common in visual effects that you just do that touch up and you just get rid of the seam. And I think that's just an example of kind of how the two things can work together. Because if you don't have the touch up of that seam, then the whole effect is going to feel cheaper. But if you did it fully in visual effects, then it's probably not going to look as good as practical. So you just find that kind of magical meeting point in the middle. Interestingly, with eyes, because eyes are so difficult to do and they can feel so soulless when they're digital. But the problem that you'll have in doing them in puppeteering or animatronics is that really subtle movement that we've mentioned, even pupil dilation, right, which will change based off of emotional circumstance and whatever. So it's actually very common that we will have a face that is fully puppet or fully animatronic or fully covered in makeup or whatever, and we actually replace the eyes digitally, and the eyes are the only component that is digital, and that allows you to get that very subtle movement, allows you to get naturalistic blinks and whatever, and that I find to be a really good combination.
I think Dark Crystal used that quite a lot, if I remember, like a lot of puppet work, but some of the characters, so it stayed very true to form. Was it Dark Crystal? I think it was. Very true to form to the original sort of sense of puppets, but then they brought more life to the characters by doing replacements of
Del Toro does it amazingly because he likes to do everything in camera. I'm not connecting that to Dark Crystal. I know Dark Crystal wasn't Del Toro, but if you look at The Shape of Water, for example, the beautiful creature in that, I don't know how many shots the eyes are replaced, but I would guess the majority of them. And so that's a perfect complement of incredibly high level practical work, incredibly high level makeup application, and incredibly high level visual effects, just creating a incredibly strong end result.
Yeah, definitely. Any other things we want to pick out here? I think we've done a fairly exhaustive discussion of the different strategies. Like, if we have missed out anything, like, please do comment on the video. Like, please, we always love to hear different people's opinions. If you've got another approach or something that you'd like us to expand upon further. Anything else you'd like to add for this, Chris?
Well, this process that we're going through here, if you're learning visual effects, I really recommend that you do it, of trying to deconstruct what's actually in the shot, because at some point you're going to have to do this for real, right? And this is terrifying when you're not looking at a final finished result, but instead you're looking at a script, and then you're going, how are we going to do that? And so you need to get training, get practicing that muscle earlier on, because if you make a wrong call, then you could be costing a lot of people a lot of money. So for example, if I was to say, look, to save money in visual effects, it's absolutely imperative that we have foam latex mask on her, and then we actually go ahead with that, and then they kind of go, well, okay, now we have the child actress in makeup for 3.5 hours every day, so we're going to have half an hour a day to shoot. Then that's going to have real problematic real world implications. So this process of deconstructing how visual effects are done is it's a really useful thing to be practicing yourself, like not just listening to me and Rich chatting bollocks here, but actually trying to figure it out yourself. I think is really going to level up your skills. Very important thing to be doing.
And an awareness of the skill set your team has as well. Like, we've talked about these problems having so many different sort of techniques, whether it's in compositing, whether it's in 3D rendering, whether it's in character work. So the balance of your team, or the balance of the people that you have available for a show, might change your approach as well. Like,
right, because there is the correct approach is the approach that works. Right, it has to work on time and on budget, but the correct approach is the one that works. So of course, as we're trying to deconstruct it, there is an objective answer to how it was done, and the guys who did it will know it, and me and Rich don't know it. But before that point, when you're trying to figure out how to do it, there is never an answer of like, oh, it's this, and that's a mistake we can make following tutorials, where it's like, you click this button, then you click that button, or whatever. But as soon as you're trying to solve shots yourself, it's all creative problem solving. That's the heartbeat that kind of underpins everything. And that's why I'm saying, like, okay, you've got to figure out that skill, because that's more important than knowing how to click this button or that plugin or whatever.
Yeah, awesome. So let us call it for this week. Thank you very much for joining us. Please do like, subscribe, and comment if there's anything you'd like us to expand on, anything you'd like us to go into more detail on. We're really enjoying this series. We hope you're enjoying it too. We look forward to you joining us for the next one. All the best, and goodbye.